Hi friends, welcome to Law Chat with Girja. I'm Girja Bhargav Patel, your host for Law Chat, and I am so excited for you to join us today. I have some amazing guests on Law Chat, and they're here to share their experiences and entrepreneurial journey with us, and through their storytelling, mentorship with us, because that is the whole point. We are all entrepreneurs and we're all on a journey, and learning from one another is the best way for us to move forward in our journey as well. And I have amazing guests who are so willing and ready to share their stories with us, their challenges and their victories and their achievements, and also their mindset. I just can't wait to share that with you, and I also just can't wait to have that conversation with them. It's such a privilege to have each and every one of them here with us today, and also it's such a privilege to have you listening in and tuning in. So let's dive in to Law Chat with Girja. Hi friends, welcome to Law Chat with Girja. I am so excited for today's episode because I have a very special guest. She is a woman of many traits and also of many skill sets and talents, but she's an educator, she's a podcast host, she's also a wedding planner. She has been in the wedding industry for over 13 years, and her Moxie Bride events, she's the CEO of that company, and I'm so excited to have Renee Dalo on the show with us today to share her journey and all of her tremendous amounts of experience with us. So welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. What a lovely introduction. Thank you.
Well, you deserve it. I mean, there's so many hidden talents. Like when I was reading about you, and I'll be honest, I've actually heard you speak in other podcasts. So I'm kind of like, whenever I have guests on my show that have been on previous podcasts that I've listened to, I'm beyond myself because obviously there's an impression that's been left on me, but also because I feel so humbled and so privileged to have you on the show because there's a lot of, you are full of experience, but you're also have so many hidden talents. Not so hidden actually, because you talk about them, but I do want to talk about all of that because it really is, Law Chat's about the entrepreneurial journey and teaching through that and mentorship through that. So I'd love to, kind of get some insight on how and where you started and how you ended up being where you are today.
Oh, Lordy, how did I end up where I am today? I think entrepreneurship is one of those things that there is no one path, right? It's not like law, right? Where you're like, okay, well, you study law, you take the bar, you're a lawyer, like that. It's very linear. Entrepreneurship is never like that, as far as I've heard from anyone that I know, anyone that I'm friends with, and certainly not myself. So I thought I'd be a musical theater performer, and I thought I'd be on Broadway for the rest of my life until I was too old to dance, and then I would retire and go teach. Like, that's what I thought my path was going to be when I was like 18 years old. If you had told 18-year-old Renee that I'd be an entrepreneur and a public speaker and have a podcast and I'd be like, well, what is happening? No, why would you do that? What? But, life has a funny way of, at least in my life, has had a funny way of like really writing itself around the things that I am naturally good at. And I don't know if that's because I've always been really open to like knowing myself and like exploring myself over the years. But honestly, when I fell in, and I did fall into the wedding industry, it really became really clear to me pretty quickly that like the skills that I use today are literally a sum total of all the things that I've always been good at. Even when I was a kid, like I was that kid who like painted on t-shirts and tried to sell them to our neighbors. Like I was that obnoxious kid. And then I was also the kid who would invite you to the backyard where I was hosting a full musical that I created. So like, when I think back, I'm like, yeah, I'm exactly the same person I've always been, just now with more bells and whistles and entrepreneurial skills around.
Your 18-year-old self was going into the industry of acting and performing. Right. And that's in and of itself the talent that I was talking about. Like you absolutely come from this other talent skill set that is not very common to many people. Like if you asked me to sing today, I'd probably you'd want to run away. But how did that process start? Did you always know you wanted to perform, or did you just
always? I begged for dance lessons when I was a kid. Like we were so broke growing up, like single mom, New York City, and I begged for dance classes. Like, and my poor mom, she made it work. I don't know how. I still don't know how, but she did it. And my little butt was in dance class like 3 times a week. I was just doing it. And I'm not, to be fair, like my musical theater journey, I actually became much more of a singer, not a dancer. I'm not really a dancer, but the journey started like all little girls. Well, not all little girls, but there is a faction of little girls who just want to be ballerinas, right? which ended up manifesting in musical theater for me, like way down the line. I didn't realize that I was changing careers
Mm-hmm.
really until I moved to LA and I was in my late 20s and all of my friends were getting married. And they were like, I was that person in our friend group who would like throw the Oscar parties, have the birthday parties, cook the meals. I was always organizing like, let's go this place and I'll bring food. Like I was the Martha Stewart of my friend group. So that when people started getting married, and I was the last one in my friend group to get married, funnily enough, I was the one that they said, well, you can just plan my wedding, can't you?
Oh, wow.
And I thought, well, I mean, I guess I could. And we did the first one like 14 years ago. And some of it was a disaster. God, we were so young and stupid, but it really became like a little side hustle for me. Like people would say, oh, Renee should help you. And then I get emails from people that I didn't really know saying like, oh, Lisa said you could help me with my wedding. And I'm like, okay. And for a while I was just sort of bartering with people or doing it as a hobby. Like I wasn't even collecting money. And then finally, when my husband and I got married, my own wedding planner said, why don't you have a business? Like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't need me at all, which wasn't true. I did need her. And I just said like, well, I live in Los Angeles. There's so many wedding planners here. I live in the same market as Mindy Weiss, who's arguably like the most famous wedding planner in our industry. And she's like, who cares? So what?
Yeah.
Not everyone can hire Mindy. Like there are many people getting married. And it was a funny moment for me because I'm normally a risk taker. I mean, I was an actor for so many years, but I just needed someone to say like, so what? Why not you? Just go do it. And then I thought, well, yeah, that's dumb. I should just go do it.
That's so funny.
So I did.
Yeah. Like sometimes we're our biggest obstacle, our mindset.
100%.
And yeah. And this person, Mindy, she can't serve everybody. She can't be of service to all the thousands of millions of people that live in LA.
Yeah.
Or, so it's of course what your friend was saying was absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So when you were transitioning though from theater into the wedding industry, and that too also very unknowingly, I think you were doing that. You were just kind of by happenstance, it just all kind of started happening.
Yeah, well, because, when you're doing musical theater in New York City, unless you're on Broadway consistently, which very few people are, a lot of times you're out of town, right? You're on the road, you're living out of a suitcase. And I did that for a good 3 years, just show to show to show. I had this giant suitcase that I could literally like climb into. It was so big. And I did that for years. And so at the end of that journey, I had all this money in the bank because how much can you possibly spend on the road? And I knew I kind of wanted to like see other places, live other places, because I'm from New York originally. So for me to pursue my dream, I just had to like go a few blocks away. It was very, very easy. So I thought, now is the chance to try Los Angeles. And when I moved out here, I didn't know that I was going to stay. Meanwhile, I've been here almost 20 years now. But what was clear to me is that in between those acting gigs, I would always work at really nice restaurants in New York, like fine dining restaurants, which I didn't think was a special skill set because it was just what I was used to. When I moved to LA and I was looking for a regular job, people were like, oh, you've worked at every nice restaurant in New York. And I was like, yeah. So I was like a hot commodity as like a hospitality person out here.
Wow.
Which I was like, what? So I ended up, I was like, this is not a skill set, but no, it absolutely is. Now I'm very clear on it. So I ended up opening a restaurant here where we had a restaurant on the bottom floor and on the top floor was banquet spaces. So there were a few years there where I was running the banquet rooms. Like I was doing weddings and we were doing parties, 3 or 4 parties every day. And that's really where the transition started.
Wow. Okay.
Because I started sensing that like, I'm really good at this. I really get excited about this. I really love it. Didn't love working in the same building all the time. I think that's the Gemini in me. I needed change. I needed to be out in the world. But that's really when it started happening. And at the same time, I was getting pretty disillusioned with like the LA acting world. Like I had gotten very close to a big sitcom, like down to like the final audition. And as I was sitting in the waiting room, my best friend texts me and she says, I'm so sorry about the show. And I was like, what?
How
I'm
did she
about to
find
go.
out?
Yeah. Well, she works in the industry. And I go, I'm like, I'm about to walk in. She's like, wait, what? And I was like, I'm at the final callback. She's like, Renee, they just announced that they cast that in the trades. They announced it. And I was sitting in the waiting room and I was like,
oh my goodness.
right. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I cannot leave other people in charge of my destiny anymore. Like that was like a clarity moment where I was like, you know what? No. Nope,
I love
not
that.
doing it. And I came home and I said to my boyfriend, who's now my husband, he's like, how you feeling? And I was like, I should have felt devastated, and part of me did, but the bigger part of me was like, absolutely not. Nope. Not doing this.
That takeaway is everything, that I
Yeah.
cannot let anyone else be in charge of my destiny anymore. And I
Which is
think
100% what actors do 24/7 all day long.
yeah. And I think, and I feel like it's not just limited to actors, it can be
No.
limited to so many other people out there. And I think entrepreneurship is a freedom from that ownership. No other way of better saying it. But like, yeah, exactly. I think, having the freedom, I mean, it's a lot of work. There's a trade-off there. There's an absolute trade-off. You definitely take your work home. You work at the oddest hours of the day, but your sweat, your blood, your tears, everything is going into something that is an investment of your future, your freedom. Oh my God,
Yes.
I love that. That was
Yes. And your successes are
yeah.
yours because they came from your brain, and your failures are too, sure, which is why it's risky and not for everyone. But it was a real moment of clarity, followed by like a lot of fear, like a lot of like, oh, what am I going to do now? Because I had spent so much of my life chasing that thing.
That, and then you, from a very young age, that was what you were doing. And
that was
even
my identity.
yeah. And so what was that mind shift? I know, okay, so that moment was a pivotal moment. That was just kind of like the aha moment. But then also, so post that, now you're in fear moment. So this fear stage of yours, how did you change your mindset to kind of, or fight your mindset and say, you know what, I still have to move forward in doing something different because I can't do this anymore, even though that was your identity. So how did you get out of that?
I think the key thing that you said, and the key thing for me, was moving, like getting into action. Because what I realized in all the time that I was an actor, I was also directing sometimes, and I was producing my own shows and my own sketch comedy shows. And we were always hustling to do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I could take that same hustle and put it over here, just attach it to this goal instead of that goal, then that I knew would be the way forward. My deal is always education. Like my first step is always, okay, there's so much I don't know. How do I know it? Let's find someone to be my mentor. Let's find, even if it's online, right? Let's find something to mentor ourselves with. And so honestly, I went to YouTube and I was like, how to be a wedding planner, because like, I knew I had the skills of how to plan a wedding, but that's different than running a business,
right?
Completely different, especially since I had been so blasé about like actually charging for my services. You know, one of my early quote unquote clients, she worked for Crate and Barrel, and in exchange for planning her wedding, she bought me a couch. And I was like, that seems fair. Yeah.
That's what you needed at the time.
Yeah.
Hey.
And I had it until my husband and I moved into this house 10 years ago. I had that couch forever. And my husband's like, we need a new couch. And I was like, oh, no, that's my couch. Like I was so connected to that piece of furniture. Anyway, so what I did was I went to YouTube, and I found this online educator who was a wedding planner, Allison Howard. She's no longer in the industry, but she was my like gateway drug. You know, she was the one who's like, she was putting out videos on like for beginning wedding planners. And then lo and behold, maybe 2 or 3 months into my like watching her videos for free, she said, I'm doing a weekend workshop in San Diego. You know, it's open for enrollment tomorrow. And I remember calling my husband and being like, so I'm going to enroll in this workshop in San Diego. And he's like, what's happening? And I was like, it's a little bit of money. And he's like, well, how much? And at the time, $1,500 sounded like a giant, it sounded, you might as well have been $10,000 to me at that point. Right. And so I said, well, it's $1,500. And he's like, okay, well, I guess. And so I enrolled, and I took the train down to San Diego with my little rolly suitcase, and I showed up like a good student. And I learned a lot that weekend. And then Allison became someone in my life who was more of a mentor to me. Like I ended up working for her for a few weddings. I would go down to San Diego. And that is really what kind of spurred me to say, like, Allison really was the one who spurred me to say, like, okay, I can do this, and I should do this. Right. I remember at that weekend, it was February, and she said to me, so when are you going to launch a website? Like, when are you going to launch your wedding planner website? And I was like, I don't know, maybe like August or like maybe the fall. And she's like, you're going to go home and launch it like next week. And I was like, oh, no. And she's like, yeah. And I kind of did that. I launched it April 1st. But here's the funny part, is I had some acquaintances who were in the wedding industry, who were wedding planners. One specifically, this gal named Liz, who I'm still good friends with. She was a wedding planner. And I said to her, this is what I'm intending to do. She said, I'll take you to lunch. You're allowed one lunch to pick my brain. So smart, right? You get one lunch. And I was like, okay. And I came with my questions. And so she knew what I had up my sleeve, and she knew that I was working. I launched my website April 1st, and I executed my first wedding April 7th.
Wow.
because someone had called Liz and says, I'm in a bind. We're getting married this weekend. We have no help and we have no money. Right.
Right.
But we need someone. And Liz was like, I can't help you, but my friend Renee can. And they paid me $500. And I also did their flowers, which I would never do again. And they were my first client though, like out of the gate. And that happens for no one. And every time I tell that story, I say like, isn't that a weird kismety thing? That won't ever happen for anyone else. Like, I understand that it's bizarre.
Yeah.
But that's the story. That's how it happened. And then because I had those photos to go from that first wedding, which was a beautiful little DIY wedding, because I had those photos,
Right.
I was able to say like, okay, well, and I had a review like pretty much immediately that I was able to roll that into more weddings
Right.
pretty quickly.
Right.
I hate to interrupt this awesome conversation, but I have to stop and talk with you about the number one thing I'm asked about by entrepreneurs: contracts. They're vital to any business relationship and to protect your business. But I also know that entrepreneurs, especially when you're starting up, money is tight. But I would never want you to compromise on a strong legal foundation. So enter yourcontractbuddy.com, a website created by me with contract templates created and drafted by me and fellow industry partners. They're ready to use and easy to plug in immediately. And they are not restricted to any specific state. So yourcontractbuddy.com is sponsoring this episode, and you and your listener can get 10% off right now with code LAWCHAT. Yes, you heard me right. 10% off right now with code LAWCHAT. And now back to our awesome conversation.
But it was that one chance that your friend gave you,
Yep.
that one opportunity that she opened the door for you for.
Correct.
And it was, yes, you can call it Kismet, you can call it the universe, but really it was the energies that you're putting out there. And also you took the leap, even if you were fearful, you took that
I
leap.
was so fearful because even though I
Yeah.
had planned for strangers, I mean, friends of friends of friends, this was someone giving me money
Yeah.
for it. And suddenly like I had the butterflies, I had the nervous stomach. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? And my husband's like, you've already done it. Like, you know what you've walked down this road before. Like, don't pretend that you haven't. And so I had his voice in my head a lot of being like, you already got this. Like, you need to get out of your own way, which is another entrepreneurial.
Yeah. And so was
lesson.
this post your marriage, this first?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. This was after we got married.
Nice. So you'd already gotten that you need to start your own business
Correct.
spiel and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So just rewinding a little bit back though, because you were at that restaurant and you were, I guess for lack of a better way, you were their event planner at the restaurant, right?
Yes. I was part of a small team of people that planned. And like, we did everything from like, we did marketing, sales. Like, we would have those initial meetings with people when they came into the restaurant. Like, we want to host a baby shower. I'm like, great, let's talk. So I really learned like every stage of that part of the business.
Right.
Sort of without realizing that I was,
and you were setting yourself up, and
Yeah.
which is really beautiful, because I feel like with what you've just shared with me in such a little time, is that all the skills that you've had, you've just taken them over to the next stage of your life.
Yep.
And you've really leaned into them and leveraged them for the next stage of your life.
Yeah, 100%. And I also say too, like, even the musical theater part of me, that those years I was on the road, when you're doing a road show like that, you pull into a theater, they put up the set, you do the show, they tear the set down, and you're gone the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not glamorous. It's not, you're not living in somewhere for 6 months, like some of these tours.
Right.
It was scrappy. And that's kind of how I feel about weddings. Like, we pull in, we set up the wedding, we have the event, and we're out by midnight, you guys. Like, we were never there. And it's that same energy of like, not that I think a wedding is a show, obviously it's a different emotional level, but it's that same hustle of like, we got to get it done. And then peace out. See you next weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. So what were some of the challenges that you faced in the beginning, aside from, your own doubts and things that were limiting to yourself, and how did you overcome them? I
had a real mindset issue around money at the beginning. Like, I had a lot of upper limiting, like, oh, I could only charge this much because that's what I would pay. Or I had it in my head at some point in the first year that I couldn't charge more than $1,500 because that felt like high, even though I live in Los Angeles. That was even 13 years ago, that wasn't enough money. But in my head, I had it in my head that like, that was enough.
Mm-hmm,
right.
Mm-hmm.
So I shouldn't want to make more than enough. I should just have enough. Mm-hmm. And that is a weird scarcity mindset that I think came from my acting days, where like, for those road shows, like, you're paid okay money, but
Yeah.
you're definitely not paid what you what you're for the amount of sweat and energy and work you're doing. It's not the same. It's not
No.
commensurate. So when I moved into entrepreneurship, I had a lot of money stuff to work through and get over
Mm-hmm.
and figure out. And then also like the legal stuff, I just didn't understand. Like I knew I needed a contract, but I also didn't really know what my contract said. And and there were a lot of things about starting a business that I just like Googled and figured out on my own that ended up sort of being challenging down the line. When I was like, one day we got a letter in the mail that was like, you're being fined like $300. And I was like, why? What did I do? And it turned out like I didn't fill out one piece of paperwork for the LA County
Oh,
something.
yeah.
And then we had to backtrack and, little stupid
Yeah.
mistakes like that I just didn't know. I was just kind of flying blind and thinking, I'll figure it out as we go.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So how did you overcome the scarcity mindset?
A lot of reading of books, a lot of education, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of self-educating. And just, it really started clicking for me. I think once I also developed like my confidence and my skill set in myself, like once I sort of realized like after a few years, like I'm good at this, I got this, like I can sell, I can execute, people trust me. On an emotional level, I got this. On a logistical level, I got this. Like once I started building that confidence and I had my feet under me a little bit more, it was
Mm-hmm.
easier to really do the work. And instead of thinking like, well, how much do I need or what feels right as far as pricing, like there is a formula. It's really just math. How much do
Yeah.
you want to make divided by how much do you want to work? Is that a number you're comfortable with? Yes or no? Figure it out and
Right.
keep adjusting. Right. So it was a journey for sure. It was
Mm-hmm.
not like an overnight situation.
Right. And I think like, especially when you're first starting, a lot of times there is a scarcity mindset unknowingly, and it
Yeah.
kind of leaches into other parts of your
Yep.
journey as well, especially when you're just trying to do things on your own and you don't
Yep.
want to like take money from X, Y, and Z or for whatever reason. And so, but what was the time when you were like, I need to like spend this money. I need to spend this money to
Oh,
grow, because I do believe you
yeah.
need to spend money to make money also.
Well, right. I mean, Renee today 100% is on board with that. And I spend more money
Yeah.
than I probably should. Rewind to 2014. I had a horrible website that I DIY'd myself. It was like gold, glitter, and fuchsia. Not at all my jam, and nothing that I really wanted to be selling, but it seemed wedding-y, right? It
Right.
seemed like
Right.
that's what we were doing at the time. And a logo that I got on Etsy, and like it was a Frankenstein website situation. And I knew it was only going to get me so far because I knew I needed a website, but then right around the end of 2014, I was like, if I'm going to really be serious and I'm really going to charge what I want to charge and make that leap, then I need to look more professional than I do. So I went out on a limb again for myself at the time, and I hired a web designer who also did a rebrand. So we didn't change the name. It's always been Moxie Bright, but redid the logo, redid the website. We had all these photos that I wasn't showcasing.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the investment back then was I think it was like $4,000. Again, it may as well have been 20, because in my head I was like, ooh,
And that's still a lot for, I
it's
mean,
sure
it's a
it
lot of
is.
money.
It
Yeah.
is. But in my head I was like below me.
Oh,
How am I going to make it
yeah.
back? Meanwhile, I made it
Yeah.
back on the very first wedding I booked after the website
Right.
launched. Like it always works.
Love that.
But that was a big growing like pain for me, because that web designer was asking me questions about my business that I hadn't had to answer before,
Mm-hmm.
like the deep work of rebranding. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was the
Mm-hmm.
first time. And then, we launched the thing in December. And then like within 2 months, I had made back all the money plus that. And that next booking season, because, weddings sort of tend to book between like
Mm-hmm.
Thanksgiving and Valentine's Day. I was like, oh, now this makes sense. Like this obviously is why you do this. And that was a real big just business lesson for me, because I wasn't really putting out authentically who I was. I was trying to be what I thought the wedding industry wanted me to be, and never a
Right.
good idea. But then once I was more true to myself and my vision and my core values and all of that, and really putting myself out there in an authentic way, I was getting much better, more
Mm.
value clients that really valued me.
Right. Right. Gosh, that's a really learning lesson just now also, is that, even in like, for example, in 2020, there's been many moments, I think a lot of people have felt a lot of their feathers have been ruffled. They've
Yep.
been, derailed even.
Yep.
And I think it's so important to kind of go back to that, especially right now
Yeah.
towards the end of the year, because we're talking it's December.
Yeah.
2020, and I think it's so important to kind of revisit your core values, actually.
100%.
Like, I think I need to do that myself, like revisit my core values. What am I doing?
Listen,
yeah.
2020 has been just challenging on every level, but I think this year it's really illuminated what I care about and what I stand for even more, and what I won't put up with, who I don't want in my business and my life, you know. Much more circumspect about every relationship I have right now.
And you know what? You're not the only person that has said that. And what I mean by that is, I think people who do a lot of introspection and thinking, they do that, right? And so I feel like a lot of them have also, even me, it's like a lot of hard lines have been drawn, and it's kind of like, this is not going with me next year. Like, we're done.
100%. Like, let's leave all of that back there, please.
Yes.
I don't 2021 does not need any of that energy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah. My gosh. So when you started, the first wedding that you had, and then you started booking more and more, what were you were obviously growing. And then in that growth, what were some things that you faced, and, what were some of the victories and some of the challenges that you had during that time?
I think everything at the beginning was a little victory. Like the first wedding we had that was logistically complicated, that went well. I was like, look at us, we're amazing. Like I was very like, oh my God, we're doing it all the time. But for me, one of the pain points at the beginning was finding help, because you can't do a wedding day on your own. Trust me, I tried. At the beginning, I was like, I'm fine on my own. No, I'm not. Called my husband. Hey, I need you to bring me a ladder. Like, no one is a village. Like, you have to have people around you. So finding the right people, and then understanding that I had to train them the way I wanted them to work. Like, that boss mindset was also, it wasn't as big of a struggle as the money mindset, believe it or not, because I'm a bossy person, but it was interesting to, like, for me to really grasp that, like, whatever I put in our employee manual and whatever I teach my employees, they're going to do. And they're also watching me so that I do it too. Right.
Yeah.
And so modeling the behavior that I expected, and really even just coming to articulate what it is I wanted them to do. Because again, I'm from fine dining, right? So there are things that I know that I assume everyone knows, and they don't know where to put the fork or the soup spoon, or they don't necessarily, unless I tell them. So that was an interesting situation for me, because I tended to, at the beginning, think like everyone knows, it's common knowledge. It's like, no, it's not. Very few things are actually common knowledge.
In fact, I Googled it over Thanksgiving again.
Yeah.
So
no, I totally see. And the only reason I don't Google it is because for 10 years I worked at a fine dining restaurant where I was like, spending my mornings, like, polishing knives.
Yeah.
With the tines facing in, by the way, because that's correct.
With the what facing in?
With the edges facing
in
to the plate.
Okay.
It doesn't leave you. It's ingrained in my bones now.
Yeah. And I think that's such a beautiful thing, because with your experience, you have so much knowledge in areas that others will not have knowledge in, but you share that with your clients, and then of course with your team. But then what you were talking about earlier is just changing the mindset from a boss or a bossy person into CEO. Right. And that, I think, is a struggle in and of itself, especially in the beginning. And then as you grow, you need to add more people to your team. Yes. So what are some tips that you would give to somebody who is adding people to their team, and how to get that CEO mindset, but then also to implement it in a way where you're getting your work done, but then still being nice?
Listen, trust me, it's ongoing. That work is, as far as I'm concerned, that work is ongoing, because we have employees that work for the wedding planning business. We also have an education branch of my business, and I have people that work for me under that branch. So for me, I think as creative entrepreneurs, we spend a lot of time saying, like, it's all in my brain, and that doesn't help anyone else. It doesn't help you either. So I had to spend a good amount of time sort of saying, like, okay, these are the things that I do, that I just do in my brain, that I need you to also know about. But then also for the education side, like, so we have a podcast and we release episodes every week. It took us a little bit to figure out every single piece of what goes into that, and putting it in a workflow so that I could say to my VA, hey, that's yours now. I'm just going to record the show, and then you guys do everything else. And that was a very freeing moment for me, because I am a control freak. But once I saw that both the editor and my VA, they got it. They don't need me in there. They don't need me micromanaging any of that. I was like, okay, well, okay. And to be true, right now in this day, I'm between assistants. So my one assistant took another, she had a total career change. And then my new assistant isn't able to start till January 1. So there are 3 weeks here where I'm on my own, and I'm telling you, I am feeling it, which is actually, like I said to my husband last night, like, it's actually a very good revelation for me, because previous me was like, I can do it on my own. I don't need anybody. I don't need to, I absolutely need people. They're essential. I can't wait for her to come back, because I could do all this work, but I shouldn't be, because I'm the CEO and the visionary. I should not be the person that schedules the podcast on Libsyn. Unnecessary. Unnecessary.
But there should be a working knowledge, which you have. Like, if you had to do it, you
Yes.
are doing it, and you're not crippled if
I
someone
did
does
it yesterday, begrudgingly, but I was like, ugh. But I followed the checklist that we had laid out. Thankfully, we had it. So yeah, I agree. I think you do have to have a working knowledge of something before you outsource. But then it has been a very great lesson for me over the years to understand that, like, when you have the right people around you and you're really clear with the outcome, the process is a little bit less important to me now. Like, how we get there, I don't need to micromanage every single part of that.
But then, do you have systems and workflows in place in order to make sure that if somebody does leave, then it's easy for someone else to kind of jump in and take over?
Yeah, we do. We do. Every part of that took a little bit. Like, we have everything on Asana, and now it's because, my brain, here's an interesting thing. So my brain, the way I just organize, it's not really organized, but like, for me, it's like the podcast is released every Thursday. So my checklist is get the podcast out. Where the actual checklist is set up the project, set up the recording room, email, there's 17 steps in get the podcast out, but my brain goes, get the podcast out.
Yeah.
Because that's a visionary mindset, as opposed to the granular, like, this is the tasks. I am not, with my wedding planning, I'm task related, but with the education stuff, I'm more big picture. And it has been an interesting dynamic to see, like, I need someone who wants to do the granular. And that's what I hire for in that part of the business.
This is a truly learning experience, because I'm in the middle of that right now.
Yeah.
Of in between people, and also realizing that I feel very crippled because there's not enough knowledge in me about certain things.
Yeah.
And I defer to education. So I'm just kind of like, YouTube, whatever. I don't care. I don't care if I have to spend money on a lesson right now. Like, I need to know how to do this.
I'm the same way. If I find myself working on a project and I hit a roadblock and I'm like, who has a course on this? Who knows Facebook ads? Whatever you need, guys, just give it, like, let's buy it. Let's learn it. Let's do it. Because I do like to know, right? Like, even if I end up hiring an expert for Facebook ads, which seems likely because they're complicated, I still want to know at least enough to know what I'm asking for, to know what I need. Yeah.
And I think that's
really the goal of the business owner, I think.
Exactly. I think that's a very important element as a CEO is, yes, you are the visionary, but you should also have some working knowledge, so you can also explain the vision and know how the process is to get to that point.
Yeah.
And it's, of course, a journey, and you'll realize that through experience also half the time.
Yeah.
So
where you're like, oh, we missed a step. Wait, we didn't write that down? Okay, put that in there. Something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. So you use the tools like Asana. What other tools do you use?
So for the wedding planning side, we use Honeybook for contracts and payments, and Aisle Planner, which is like wedding planning software with our clients. So that's, and of course, a bunch of other things like Canva and Planoly and Calendly and all the automation stuff. On the education side, we use Kajabi for our courses. WordPress is our website. And then there's a bunch of other like things that go with the education. Like, we use ScreenFlow to record and Canva for the slides. It's like, it's kind of never ending. But the education brand is mostly run on Kajabi, and Kajabi is like a great all-in-one, which I love. Like, Kajabi saves our life on the daily because everything's in there. It's just good.
Nice. And I'm going to actually put the links to all of this stuff in the show notes as well, just in case if somebody's like, what is that? So
yeah, please. And Asana is our education brand, like how we work with the team. So like my podcast editor is in there, my VA is in there, I have another assistant that's in there. And we all just kind of, that's where I go to say, like, here's an idea.
Yeah.
Renee has an idea, and it's like, oh Lord, okay. What are we doing now? A lot of ideas, you guys.
Oh my God. That is so funny, because it's like, You're talking to me, but I feel like I'm hearing myself talk sometimes.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think entrepreneurs, people who stick at this and who are successful and do it, like we're built differently, but all in the same way. Like I see a lot of myself in all of my entrepreneurial friends. I'm like, yep, understand you.
Yeah.
Our
Every time
brains
I'm
work
like,
a little bit differently, I think.
yeah. Every time I'm like, I have an idea. I feel everyone feeling stressed. Like it's not like there might be a little
Yeah.
excitement, but there's like, oh man, there's a lot of work that's about to happen.
Oh yeah. Every time someone talks to me. So like one of my really good friends is another wedding planner. She's writing a book. She just finished writing her book. And so she was like, hey, I want to pick your brain to talk about this book launch. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we like got our coffees, got online. Like I don't do this for anyone but my friends, by the way. But she was like picking my brain about a book launch. I've never launched a book, but I pay attention to everything and everyone all the time. So after like a 45-minute conversation, Leah goes, God, I have a lot of work to do now. Why do I call you? I'm like, I'm sorry. Because I was like, you could do this and start a book club and we can do this kind of launch. And then we'll do email marketing, podcast campaign. Like I was creating like a 6-month launch package for her. And she's like, I don't understand how your brain works. And I was like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I love you. Just do half of it. Okay, bye. Yeah.
That's so funny. So speaking
coach
of
part of my brain.
ideas, I know. Speaking of ideas, and well, the flow chart is definitely in the brain. And then I'm like, who's gonna do it? Because there's like, right? And that's
Right.
when all my team is like, oh, please not me.
Yeah, our poor teams.
Oh, sorry. Anyways, so you, speaking of, ideas and all, so now you have this thriving wedding event planning business, but then you also have a podcast and you're educating on the other side and you're part of all these other things. So how did that happen? What was the transitions that you went through to build this now so-called empire of yours?
It's so funny. You're like the second person this week to call it an empire, which makes me like proud on one hand. On the other hand, goes like, oh, okay. I'm proud. I am proud of I want to be Oprah. Who doesn't want to be Oprah? See, this is how my brain works. I think that everyone wants to be Oprah, where there's like probably 90% of people listening are like, I don't. And this is the difference. The education piece of my business came about fairly organically. If I could tell you a slight story here. So I was one of the first leaders of the Rising Tide Society meetups in Los Angeles.
Okay.
This was like 5 years ago now, 6 years ago. And this is right when Rising Tide was first starting. Are you familiar with Rising Tide?
Oh yeah, I'm totally involved with them here. So
and I was so happy to be like on the ground floor of that organization. Like it's amazing. We were about maybe 6 months into our LA, maybe a little bit more, to our LA community. And Natalie Frank, who's one of the co-founders, reached out to me and she said, we want to do an in-person event in Los Angeles. Do you have any insight into speakers we could hire? And I said, sure. And I sent her a list of like friends and also like Jasmine Starr, who I had done a wedding with. I was like, I can get you Jasmine. She's like, I know Jasmine, thanks. Which was funny. I was like, of course you do. Now I'm like, of course you do. But back then I was like, oh, we could get her and she's local. And so Natalie wrote back to me and said, well, what about you? And I remember sitting right here at this desk, looking at the email. My husband was standing here and I read the email and went, I think Natalie just asked me to speak at the Rising Tide event. And my husband goes, you do that every month. And I was like, no, a big event. And he was like, well, then you should say yes. And I was like, but I've never done that before. And he's like, that's why you should say yes. So I wrote back and said, I mean, I'm interested, but what would I talk about? And she said, whatever you want. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity that I don't think I can say no to. Yeah. So I said yes, and I figured it out. Like Tina Fey always says, you say yes, and then you figure that shit out.
Yeah.
And I ended up speaking at that event. They ended up streaming it online to YouTube and their website.
Wow.
A very strange thing happened after the fact. So what I spoke about was the power of language and how women, especially in business, tend to use limiting language. Like we say things like, I'm no expert, or we say, I just want to check in about qualifying, limiting language that keeps us small. And the audience that night was 95% women. And it went over very well with the in-person audience. I did not realize that because they were streaming it, the thing has been seen like over 500,000 times, not just me, but all the speakers that night. I do a lot of networking. Back before COVID, I was out all the time networking. And my best friend Holly and I would go to all these networking events, wedding industry and creative, and people would stop me at these events and say, are you Renee? Did I see you I saw you online. And it was the weirdest, unexpected thing about people were saying like, you're in my head now when I write an email, or like, I've watched that thing 3 times. I sent it to 10 of my girlfriends, and I'm like, oh, okay.
What an impact.
Had no idea. Natalie said, talk about something you're passionate about. And that's in the moment what I wanted to talk about, because I'm tired of women playing small. I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of us all pretending like it's okay. We have this little business and it's just a side hustle. No, because when women make real money, we give back more. Statistically, it's a fact. When women acquire wealth, we end up impacting our communities, either local or large, far more than our male counterparts. So why shouldn't we pursue wealth and success at the same rate they do? Why? We of course should. So that's my always soapbox. Well, what ended up happening is, because of that, other outlets reached out to me and said, hey, will you come speak here, local conferences? And then eventually I got to speak at Wedding MBA, which is a big conference in our industry. It's in Vegas every year, like 5,000 to 10,000 people to attend. And that was the conference that sort of spurred me into like, okay, well now I should probably do more with education, because you can't really transform someone's mind in 40 minutes. You can give them the beginnings of it, right? But then it's always more powerful to say, look, this is who I am and what I stand for and what I teach. And if you want to learn from me more, come over here and I have this for you. And so that is eventually what happened, is that I knew what I was presenting at Wedding MBA is a very specific niche topic for wedding planners, again, about language. But we have this service package for wedding planners that normally is called Day of Coordination, which is a dumb name because it's not day of. Nothing. You don't work for one day. It's dumb. But our industry calls it that. And so it's like basically my mission to get rid of that terminology. So that's what I spoke about. And what I teach about is how to do that, how to move to a different service package. We call it wedding management. So, and so I knew that I had to develop something where people could come learn from me further. And so back in 2018, that's what we did.
What I love about this story is that you took that moment at the rising tide, not to talk about your business per se, not to talk about the services that you're offering, not to talk about anything like that, but to empower other humans, other women. And
I never thought about it like that, but yeah, that was actually what happened.
Yeah. I mean, I've spoken at Rising Tide events, and I've whatever, some of the bigger events also, and I look back and I'm like, okay, great. I talked about law, which is totally people need to know about it. But but it is like, and I was asked to talk about that too. Now, if someone had said, talk about whatever you want, I probably would have talked about that too, because it's like your mind is so in a box.
Right.
And you're always thinking, well, for the most part, you're thinking about networking, or you're thinking about, I want to add value, but I also want to gain value too, or, whatever that process is there. But I love how you use that moment, not for yourself, but to empower others. And I think that is just beautiful. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you. Honestly, thinking about it from that lens, that actually might be why it resonated for people, because I wasn't selling I had nothing to sell. I wasn't there for any other reason than they asked me. And I was like, I'm going to talk about some things that bother me.
But I think that's why it resonated so much. You're right. Yeah. And that's why it took you to the next level of becoming on the speaker circuit, because you were speaking from the heart. You were speaking authentically to what was important to you, and not selling something, which, adding value and selling, which is great, but not that it's wrong.
I'm not opposed to selling. I think everyone needs to get off their craziness about like, well, I'm being sold to. It's like, because everyone needs to make a living. And if you're getting value from this person, then yes, let them sell. I actually get disappointed when I'm not sold to. At this point in my journey. Like, I was on a webinar a few weeks ago. This entrepreneur was offering a mastermind, and I was like vaguely curious about it. I was like, I'll go to her webinar and check it out. She taught for 90 minutes, did not pitch anything. And I got annoyed. I was like, where is the pitch? I cannot be here all day waiting for this pitch. And then her follow-up emails also didn't pitch it. And I was like, okay, if she's not going to pitch to me, then I'm out. Because my mindset is different now, right? I understand that, like, yes, she gave me value from that lesson, but if I want to know more, don't waste my time. Just tell me more. Tell me how to learn more from you. So I can make the decision on my own,
That's very interesting. I like that. So I've sat in those webinars, but I've been utterly annoyed by them, and not because
I think most people are. I think I'm in the minority. Yeah.
No, and it's not because they didn't, they totally made a pitch. But what I felt though was that they did not offer enough value in the sense of if you're going to take an hour of my life and you're wanting me to come and you're saying I'm giving you all this stuff, but in reality, you're not giving me anything but puffery and fluff.
Right.
Then that annoys me. Now, I don't mind going somewhere, getting information and they're adding value to me and then asking me for something, right? That's totally like, I think that's fine. I think you should do that. If you don't do that, it's like, if you're running for president and you don't vote for yourself, something's wrong with you, right? Like, why the heck would anybody else vote for you then? So
true.
Like, so you should definitely like toot your own horn.
Yes.
But I feel like there is definitely some charisma that needs to go into that.
Yeah, I think the webinar, I mean, I like webinars and I sell through webinars as well, but what we always try to do is give at least like 40 minutes of like solid takeaways, even if you end now, you could leave with at least something that you're like, you know, I should be doing that, or just some motivation or inspiration. Like, even if it's not tangible, even if it's like, I feel better today, but like, we need that, especially this year. But yeah, I mean, there is a finesse to it that I think not everybody gets right.
Yeah. And I think it definitely is over time you learn, or you're just like the very aggressive seller, which is totally fine. Some people like that, but
that's bro marketing. I'm not into that.
So when I was just thinking about the bro marketing right now.
Because you're thinking of like 5 or 6 faces just popped into your head.
Absolutely. Like boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, you're like, oh, onslaught of bro marketers. No thanks.
Oh, they pop up on my like Facebook. I'm like,
all the time. And I want to be like, Facebook, you need to be a little more like nuanced, because obviously I'm not going to buy from this bro. Like, pay attention.
Oh my gosh. Seriously. I've been there, seen it. Yep. So tell me a little bit more about your education side of your business, and why did you decide to add that to you, or diversify your own, current business with that?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like, so many people are like, wow, you really pivoted in 2020. And I'm like, well, I had all this. You just didn't notice it. Right? Like, we've had it since 2018. For me, I wanted to explore that side of the business because so many women, mostly women, come into the wedding industry, especially as planners, with absolutely no business experience.
Yeah.
Or they come in because they liked planning their own wedding, which is fine, but they often don't have anything underneath that desire. It's just like, I like pretty things. I'm a fairly organized person. Let me take a stab at this. And what I started realizing over the years is that the people who come into the industry and aren't like us, who seek out the education, they're really devaluing the work that those of us who take this very seriously do. On a macro level. On a micro level, I was just seeing too many people making dumb mistakes, and I was like, oh, I can help you, because that's also my personality, is that like, if you're a friend of mine, I'm going to give you unsolicited advice. That's just it. And you can ignore it, but I'm still going to give it. That's my personality. So when I was seeing so many wedding planners struggling, because everyone's in the Facebook groups asking the questions all the time, I'm like, this is silly. I should just be teaching what I know. And I never teach anything that I'm not good at or I don't know. I'm not going to stand up here and be like, let me tell you how to budget, because I don't care about it. I really don't. Like, go learn from someone else if you care about budget. But sales, language, empowerment, running a successful business, those things I care about deeply about. And there isn't really like a linear path to becoming a wedding planner, right? There isn't like one class you can take or one certification you can get. You really have to seek out the things that are filling the holes in your own experience and make that your education. You really have to educate yourself in this industry. And it's funny too, because that's the same thing as acting, right? Like, anyone can wake up one day and be like, I'm an actor. And so I find myself again in an industry where like the barrier to entry doesn't exist. And I just felt like I needed to do something about it.
You were the, I think, second person that I've heard say that in the last 2 weeks about the wedding industry, or just event industry in general. That there's no barrier for entry. None. And sometimes people just join, and there's really also no guidebook. And so it's so nice that you have something that you provide your listeners, or your community, forget listeners. And there's a couple other people that do the same thing. And it's just so nice to have people who can educate and see the void of that and literally add to their business, because you're not changing your business, you're diversifying your business now.
Right. And that's what I hope to, and that's why we have the podcast, because I want there to be a free way to learn, not just from me, but all of my guests, that, you know, if you don't have anything to invest at the beginning, not everybody
Yeah.
has $1,500 to
Yeah.
throw into a workshop at the beginning. You know, I'm fortunate that my husband's a TV producer and he makes a good living. And like, I could say, hey, I need a little money for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody has that, especially now. So it's
Mm-hmm.
important to put the information out there, you know, and I know sometimes it can feel like drinking from a fire hose because there's so much out there, but like, that's the beauty of being an entrepreneur and owning your own business, is you get to say, okay, yes, this is all available to me. What do I need right now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where can I start? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you. Like, even with law, I think a lot of people are scared. One, they're overwhelmed with the information, and it kind of they just don't even want to think about it because it's so much. And then two, it's usually expensive because you generally seek legal help when there's a problem and not
Right.
preventative.
Right.
And so I feel like my whole base is also just that. Like, I want to provide education. That's why I started this podcast, because there's so many people out there that just can't afford a coach, or
Right.
they don't have the right mentors because they don't have a network, or they've just not
Right.
connected. And so
Right.
this was my way of also providing mentorship through storytelling.
Yeah.
But then also similarly, even with I have a lot of like resources on my website that allow people to try to DIY whatever they can DIY.
Yeah.
Because that is reality. Reality
is
is not that
reality.
everybody can just wake up and spend
No.
thousands on a contract, or, you know, spend
Absolutely.
thousands on educating themselves, because that's
And
just,
I think once people get going and they are making an income, then they reinvest it. And that's
Yes.
where the growth comes from.
yes.
But just getting started, it's funny what you said, law, you know, no one calls a lawyer until there's something to fix.
Yeah.
Have you watched the HBO series, The Undoing, with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So as a lawyer, I think you should probably watch it, but
Okay.
we just finished it last night. And there's a quote in there where Nicole Kidman's character says to her dad, in talking about this lawyer, who's it's an amazing role, amazing actor. She goes, I don't like her. And her father says, you don't have to like her. Going to a lawyer is like going to a car mechanic. You go there to get something fixed.
Not
And
true,
I
but okay.
never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
I had this like, oh my gosh, that's so right. Like yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have
mm-hmm.
to like them.
Mm-hmm.
She's like a shark kind of lawyer, you know, she's like fierce.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah, okay. I'll take that quote with me. Thank you so much.
Yeah. But you know, that I like that quote, because it kind of like goes to the essence of a lawyer when they're in their zone of trying to protect you, especially in court.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's how they are protecting you.
Yeah.
But I also feel like just how like you're trying to change the language around some of the wedding industry and how things are. I feel like even with lawyers, we need to do that, because law is such an integral part of someone's business. You cannot have a business and not have to think about law, but we just pretend it doesn't exist.
Or people are so afraid, right? I think for humans all over the world, no matter what they do, so many of our actions are based or not based in fear, right? We're fearful, so we don't. And so I think when someone says, well, you need a lawyer, everyone's like, oh, I don't want to get a lawyer. It's like going to the dentist. It's like, actually, if you have a good lawyer there, you want them on your team. They're a team player. They're a teammate. Like you need them to help you protect yourself instead of going to them when everything's on fire.
Exactly. That's my thing, is like to change the dialogue around that, because I really want to make it accessible, and I wanted to make it where people are comfortable with it. So speaking of law, since we're already sitting on this topic,
let's do it.
You tell me, when in your experience in the wedding industry, when were you like, oh man, I wish I had something. I wish I'd done this legally, or in retrospect?
There's been a couple of times. At first, my contract, full disclosure, was given to me by my mentor. She goes, you can just use mine. And I was like, all right, which don't ever do. Don't use someone else's contract, please. It's horrible. But then once I got going and I realized this doesn't really protect me from the things I'm having trouble with, as things would happen at weddings. So here's a fun story. It's not a fun story. I did a wedding out in Santa Barbara, which is like 2 hours away. And I tell you that to say, like, we weren't in our home base. Like we were already sort of out of our comfort zone at this place. Like we were out there with our clients. I was on this wedding as a referral from the photographer. So like we had our own little merry band of four, me and my assistant and her assistant. And we found ourselves at this wedding, and the couple was lovely, but their crew there were big drinkers. And so pre-wedding ceremony, they were already pretty far gone on the booze. Of course, we didn't really know that. The photographer sent her assistant across the street to the hotel to start taking photos of the groom and the groomsmen. And when she knocked on the door and was told to come in. And when she entered the hotel room, she encountered the groom fully naked.
Oh my gosh.
And she kind of, went and ran out of the room and ran back across the street to find me and the photographer and said, I don't know what to do. Oh, and then also the groom did like a little, like the groom was not embarrassed. He did like a little shimmy, like he was pretty into the fact that she walked in on him. I mean, obviously he said, come on in, and he was fully naked, but he was also like pretty drunk too.
Right.
So she comes across the street and she's crying because she had some, a past that did not really, none of us would want that situation, but she especially was sensitive to it. She comes across the street and she finds me and she finds the photographer and she says, I don't know what to do because I don't want to go back over there. And my mind immediately went to, I don't have a harassment clause in my contract.
Yeah.
And the photographer didn't either. And I said, do you? And she's like, no. And I'm like, legally, you can't leave. Otherwise you're going to be in breach of contract. And we literally sat there, like none of us with any law background going like, oh God, what do we do? What do we do? Okay. And then I said, like, I'm going to go over and tell him to put on his fucking clothes. And otherwise she's leaving as a human person and hope that no one says, let me see the contract. Right. The minute I got back to LA, the second I got in this door, I was on the computer going like, how do I redo my contract? Because at least if that were to happen in the future, I could say, listen, you initialed it. Anti-harassment clause, and now with how many years it's been on my timelines, I actually say photographer arriving at grooms, everyone must be dressed. Why am I telling grown men to get dressed? But at least I'm doing my part so that if it ever happens again, I can say, look, we did our due diligence on our end. You were in breach of contract. Technically this person can leave.
Right.
Would she probably have? No. But she didn't want to go back in that room.
No, and then who are you going to send? Because if you only have two people taking pictures.
Now, the other photographer ended up picking that up, but I had to go have a very awkward conversation where I was like, did you shimmy naked to the second photographer? He's like, no. I'm like, why would she lie then? What is happening? And as I got close to him, I was like, oh, you're very drunk. Okay. He also took his clothes off later in the night again. Like once he got dressed, like that was like his thing, I think. Get drunk, take off your clothes. Not all of his clothes, but he got down to his boxers. It was words. Weddings where I'm like, what is happening? Am I like the wheels have gone off the bus at this point?
That is literally a standard in all of my any event planning, any event, a professional contract that I have out there, even on my template shop, and even the ones that I customize for my clients. And as I write that paragraph, every single time I'm kind of like, gosh, like what can possibly happen? And then it's like, I hear stories and I'm like, this is why I'm putting this is why I'm putting it in there. This is why I'm putting it in there. Because while I may not do it, my family members may not do it, but it still happens. And it's the worst when it happens and you feel like you can't leave. And then, there's definitely like a legitimate defense at some point but are you willing to spend that money in order to defend it? That's the question, right? Litigation can happen. You can definitely go into all of that, but do you have the finances to go into it? And are you willing to spend that time and energy? And mental energy is number one. Like your mental capacity can be drained after a lawsuit.
100%. And honestly, most wedding pros they're not making a lot of money. I know there's this fiction out there that like we're all millionaires on our yachts, like laughing as like we collect no, absolutely not. Every wedding planner, every wedding pro I know, we're mom and pop businesses. We have slim margins, especially floral designers. They have almost no margin. Like no one's making $1 million just doing this service-based work. So yeah, you really have to consider like, is it going to be worth it to litigate this? But weddings are a complex mix of adrenaline, expectations, and alcohol. And once you put those three things together, the day of, like, you don't know what's going to happen.
There's a lot of emotions invested in it. And I think like, you're wanting to have a very happy atmosphere and,
Yeah, you want it to be chill and relaxed and fun.
Yeah. And,
Then
you
like
know,
that one groomsman who gets too drunk kind of ruins it maybe sometimes.
that or even a bridezilla can ruin it. And,
Oh,
you
well,
know,
that too.
harassment is not just about somebody exposing themselves, but it could also be somebody speaking to you in such a bad way that you are coming to tears, right? Like, and that's the problem. And so, you know, I feel like I'm so glad you realized it. I'm glad you went back home and Googled it and put it into your contract because
I hired someone to do a new contract for me. So I started out with this template from someone else. And then when I started realizing, it was before that particular incident, there was a bunch of stuff about like, I had these clients that had a lot of DIY and they just expected us to finish it. And I was like, that's going on the contract. So over time, it became, again, like a Frankenstein contract of me just adding things. And so I went to a lawyer and I said, listen, please help me because all of these things need to be in there, but I know they're not correct. And so I think that's also the lived experience of having these horrible, horrible experiences like the photographer one that you say, okay, absolutely not again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen a lot of those Frankenstein contracts. So they're actually really good. They cover everything. But I actually love going in there and just rephrasing it or putting it together where it just makes more sense. So I'm so glad that you went ahead and took that step because it's so important.
It's important, you know, especially now in light of COVID, you know, I redid my contracts again this year because my contracts, you know, before COVID, I had in all these years, I'd had maybe 2 couples completely cancel. One had canceled before they even planned anything. They sort of hired me and figured out like a few months, like, we don't want to do this. I had one cancel on the Saturday before, the Tuesday before the Saturday. So that was quick.
Yeah.
Other than that though, I had never had anyone reschedule or cancel for any reason other than like, well, you know, one was illness. The other was, we're not going to do this. It had been such a non-issue before COVID that my contract around cancellations and reschedules was just really like basic. It certainly didn't cover pandemics. There was no monetary there was a very low monetary like fee attached to a reschedule. And we've had to rethink all of that because now the name of the game is like everything's in pencil on my calendar. You know, everything is movable and we have to be clear. We have to be kind to our clients, I believe, but also stay in business. We have to stay open.
Right. And so just a quick question on that. How have you managed and adapted to this new era of COVID? Because a lot of things have changed and some things will stay the same also post change.
Right. It's been interesting. You know, in our contracts, we had a $500 rescheduling fee. So, and the first time everyone got rescheduled, there were some cases where I didn't, you know, quite honestly, I didn't implement it. We have one client who has a single mom who's a nurse. I'm not going to charge her $500. She's in a hospital every day fighting COVID. Like, absolutely not. I have other clients who have postponed their wedding now 3 times. I haven't charged them $500 each time. I guess I could have, but that also seemed punitive. And like, this is no one's fault, right? Like, we're having to do all this rescheduling. It isn't anyone's fault. So what we started doing is when people started rescheduling and moving, we have most of our clients on payment plans. And not every month, but like every couple of months, there's an installment payment due. And so we just started breaking up those payments, right? If they rescheduled, we would just say, okay, well, let's add the $500 on, but then break it off into the next 12 months. So it feels, so it's manageable because everyone's income is suffering, right? And we wanted to be able to work with people. But now that we're into rescheduling to 2022, you know, that $500 isn't, it's meaninless now. So we are it's still kind of a work in progress for us. Fortunately, we had a good year despite all of that because of the education brand and because of some initiatives we put forth for the community in that way. So I feel like I'm in a position to not have to stress about that as much. And therefore my clients don't as well. And I'm happy to do that for them because like, this has been such a heartbreak to watch these couples just reschedule, rethink their weddings, you know, something that's supposed to be so joyous. And because they've hired me, hopefully, you know, stress-free. I mean, there's nothing I can do about that this year. It just is. So,
well, that's so nice that you're showing so much grace.
I'm trying. I mean, trust me, it is hard because I'm looking at our cash flow spreadsheet and I'm like, whew, okay, 2021, let's go.
Well, like you said, it's ever changing. It's everything is very fluid now. So I think people should be able to kind of adapt as much as they can.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to thank you so much for all of this amazing wisdom that you have shared with us. Before we go though, I want to ask you some fun questions. So
Yes.
tell me, what is your favorite magazine or book?
I don't do magazines so much anymore because we tried
Yeah.
to like we had to like, remember when like the book came out and everyone was like, I'm a minimalist. We're not, but we got rid of all the magazines. I do like Domino. I like a good like architecture. Like if I'm at the airport and I'm like,
Yeah.
what am I going to buy? It's always like a home decor or architecture. Like I'm a kind of a nerd in that way.
Mhm.
If we had like, if we were like millionaires, I'd be redoing this house like in repetition. I'd be like, tear it down, let's start over. My husband would kill me because I love all that. My favorite book, oh, there's so many good books. I think my favorite book right now is like a silly little rom-com-y book called Red, White, and Royal Blue.
Oh, nice.
It's so rom-com-y. It's about,
I love rom-com books.
it's an LGBTQ book, I guess, but it's about
Yeah.
if the Prince of England and the first son of the US met and fell in love. So it's a little political, which is totally my thing. Like I could watch The West Wing like on repeat forever. I just love it. It's a very romantic book. And so that's been, I've read that like twice during quarantine. It's like my like emotional comfort book.
That's so funny. Have you seen Madam Secretary? Speaking of West Wing.
Obsessed.
Oh my
Although
gosh.
I could do a
obsessed.
rewatch of that right now. Like I love it.
I'm watching it right now. I'm obsessed. Like
She's
it gives
so
me
good.
chills. It gives me chills. It's so amazing.
Yes.
It's fire. I just love that show. It's speaking of shows, what is your favorite show on Netflix or any other streaming channel?
100% Schitt's Creek all day. I could watch it. I have watched it easily 50 times. My husband is even just like, can't you recite it by now? I'm like, sure can. Love it. So much so that people send me stuff. Look, I have this cup here. This is a quote from the show. I have so stuff. Funny. People have sent me.
I need to get on the bandwagon. I haven't done it yet.
You have to. One of my students, one of my mastermind girls sent me a Rose Apothecary lip balm, which is from the show. She sent it to me for Christmas, so I keep it on my desk.
I love that. That
Swag.
is so funny.
I'm not really like a fan of things. Like I'm not a tchotchke like fandom person, but for this show I am.
Right. Oh
Bizarre.
gosh. And what do you love the holiday season? Christmas and Thanksgiving?
Do. You know, in California, it's strange for me because I am used to that New York Christmas where there's like the Rockefeller Center tree and the windows at Saks.
So dreamy.
And like so dreamy and like it snows and we bundle up. And here I'm in like a short sleeve shirt. I don't know what's happening. It's 70 degrees. But I do love the holidays. Just in general, I like that week between Christmas and New Year's. That's my favorite.
Ah, interesting.
That like really slow week where like no one expects anything from you. Everyone's just hanging out and like you're baking or cooking I love that.
Yeah. Huh. I always get sad like when Christmas comes around just because it's like it's done. All this hoopla is done. And I'm like,
right.
And then it's like nice that like slow motion time is nice
and
too.
then New Year's is like, hey, it's New Year.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then now if we've heard such amazing things coming out of you and if somebody wants to contact you or connect with you, where do we find you? How do we connect with you?
So I have a lot of social media situations, but let's just keep it simple. It's all of my name. So my website is reneedalo.com. Instagram is Renee Dalo. The wedding planning stuff is all under Moxie Bright Events. And we'll just leave it at that. There's also a podcast, Instagram. We have a lot going on.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to put everything, even Schitt's Creek, on our notes.
Please come talk to me about Schitt's Creek. I can talk about it forever. I love it so much. It's so funny.
I know that should be like the starting line with you then if they're connecting with you.
Just send me a quote from Schitt's Creek. I'll be like, we are best friends forever.
I thoroughly enjoyed. Had lots of laughs with you today. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. And I like being on video too. It's good to see your face.
Yeah, it's like, woohoo, everybody. Say hi to them on YouTube. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining Law Chat with Girja. I love these kind of stories and conversations where we can be real, honest, and open, and having fun at the same time. I hope you are inspired and motivated to keep doing the amazing work you are doing. If this is something that gave you all those feels and then some, truly motivated and inspired for you, you can show your love in all or one of these ways. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and share this video with your community and tell them about it or share with somebody that can benefit from it. I look forward to seeing you next time on another episode of Law Chat, and until then, keep moving forward. Bye.